13-year-old Johnny O'Connor was at the Donnellys' house because he wanted to feed their pigs. He witnessed the vicious mob attack of James Sr., his wife Joanna, son Tom, and niece Bridget, as well as the family dog. After the mob set fire to their home, they continued on to the home of another son, William Donnelly. But let's go back first. The Irish famine of 1845 through 1851 caused the deaths of about 1 million people and the immigration of up to 2.5 million more. One such family was James and Joanna Donnelly. They decided to settle in Canada on land that was being given away by the governor. Unbeknownst to the Donnellys, who were squatters, the land they had settled on was owned by James Grace, who had agreed to lease the property to a man by the name of Patrick Farrell. When Grace decided he wanted to evict the Donnellys, the judge did not agree, and the Donnellys were permitted to keep the land that they had occupied illegally. Needless to say, Patrick Farrell didn't want to split anything, and feelings flared, so much so that James Donnelly and Patrick Farrell ended up fighting. The fight ended up with Patrick Farrell dying and James Donnelly going into hiding before being found, convicted, and sent to the Kingston Penitentiary. He received a 7-year sentence, serving only 4 years after his wife Joanna appealed to the Crown for clemency, and it was granted. The Donnellys were excellent businessmen and opened a thriving and prosperous stagecoach business. But needless to say, rival stagecoach operators did not share in their success. In fact, one of the competitors vowed to run the Donnellys out of business. From damaged stagecoaches to dead horses and burned stables. From assault to theft to robbery to arson, you name it, the Donnellys were blamed for it. And while they were never found guilty of any crime, the townspeople had already indicted them. The Donnellys soon would find themselves feuding with everyone over everything, be it money, land, cattle, horses, and any other typical transaction. It was described that the Donnellys were considered a problem by just about everyone in Lucan and Biddulph Township. With so much fighting, thievery, and confusion, the local priests formed a peace committee to try to return law and order to the small town. All members of the peace committee had agreed to have their homes searched for stolen property, at least everyone in the town except the Donnellys. James Donnelly Sr. at one point even had it out with the priest, saying that he was preaching hatred, and he went as far as to donate money to build an Anglican church. And of course, this outraged the small, tight-knit Catholic community. When a barn owned by Patrick Ryder burned down, the townspeople blamed, you got it, the Donnellys. The Donnellys' relationship was so fractured that on February the 4th, 1880, the townspeople, having had their full of the Donnellys, turned into an angry mob and planned to rid their town of evil by marching to the Donnelly farm to detain all the men, scare them, and get them to admit to all of their crimes. But since history has shown that angry mobs don't tend to demonstrate restraint or self-control, especially when drunk, the end result would be the complete destruction of the Donnelly home, burning it to the ground. 4 Donnellys were killed, including their dog, and one additional son was hunted down and killed that same night in a separate incident. The code of silence swept the entire small town. Neighbors who were interviewed showed absolutely no remorse. Despite a reliable eyewitness and 2 trials, no one was ever convicted of this unspeakable crime.
This is Highway 23 going towards Mitchell, and The guy that I did the house for told me at the school here, this is where the townspeople congregated before they actually went and murdered the Black Donnellys at this school that me and Mike did the urban expedition at. So they gathered here, and then they headed west to Roman Line, and then Roman Line's just down, just north of here. It's about 2 miles that way, and then it's 2 miles north, and that's where the Black Donnellys actually live. There's a guy there that has a sign on his house and basically gives a history. But they all met here. And then they went there and got him, burned him, hung him. But I just wanted to share that with you. I thought it was pretty cool, pretty neat thing that we're actually right here. So. I don't know if you guys see this, but okay, so this is where the Donnellys actually live. This is up Roman Line. And I'll get a picture of that. Yeah. You guys can see that. Zoom. February 4th. Yeah, that's my birthday. So yeah, this is the actual spot where they're murdered. And then there's another sign over here where it says the Donnellys Homestead. Tours available. You guys want to come and take a tour. 227-1244. So yeah, so they met at that school. And then they got on their horses. And they came over here. Fuck them up. But anyways, when I'm Irish, so and my grandparents lived in Lucan, and it was like the feller that just did his roof for it. When my grandparents were young, it was hush hush about the Donnellys. You didn't talk about them, and now it's been a long time. People talk about it all the time. But yeah, this is where they were slain. This is the church on Roman Line. This is where the Donnelly grave site is, or the tombstone. I don't know where it is, but I thought that was it, but it's not, because they all died in the 80s. So this is, I guess this is the church where they have the tombstone. And I know that when I was a kid, people used to chip pieces off of it, take it as a souvenir. So I don't know where it'd be. I've never seen it, but we'll look for it. We'll take a gander and we'll look for it. Actually, I think they might have moved it inside the church, but we'll take a look around. So this is that's Highway 7, or the road, Roman Line and Highway 7. This is the church, and then right down Roman Line is where the homestead was, and around the corner on 23 is the school where they met townspeople before they went and did what they did. So, hey, I found it. Look, so there it is. There's the actual grave of the Black Donnellys. See what I'm talking about? They start chipping pieces off of it and taking it. Oh, look at all the loot. Hey, they're gonna bring Will out here. I'm just joking. That was bad. So that's that's the final resting ground here at the.
There is a standard modern model of law that we are all used to, and I am going to be talking about a different one. The standard model, this isn't working as well as it should, but it'll work, is that law is made by legislature and or judges. It is detected and prosecuted either publicly for criminal law or privately for tort law. Disputes are resolved in government courts, and the verdict is enforced by government. There is an alternative model in which law enforcement is private and decentralized. That model turns out to be historically fairly common. Arguably, most surviving legal systems started that way, and forms of it still exist. And I should warn you to avoid confusion that the word feud and the word feudal have no connection. They are etymologically unrelated and conceptually unrelated. So I am not talking about feudal law, I'm talking about feud law. The logic of feud law is very simple. If you harm me, if you wrong me, I threaten to harm you unless you compensate me. For that system to work, there are 4 problems it has to solve. You need some mechanism such that right makes might. That is to say, you need some way in which the threat is a believable threat when you really have wronged me, but is not a believable threat when you haven't, because otherwise it becomes simple extortion. I claim you wronged me and demand compensation. You need a commitment mechanism. Once you have wronged me and I threaten to harm you, your response is that if you harm me, I'll harm you back. Maybe I'll kill you. So you need some way that makes it in my interest to carry out my threat in order that you have an incentive to back down and compensate. You have to make it in my interest to carry out my threat even when doing so is costly and even when I am dead. So one of the problems is, how do you arrange a commitment mechanism that lasts through death? Third, you need some mechanism such that rights protection works for people who don't have lots of friends with swords, or lots of money for attorneys, or whatever the relevant assets are in that society. So you need some way to believably protect people too weak to believably threaten retaliation. Finally, you need a way of ending feuds. A lot of people have a mental image of a feud as I kill one of your people, then you kill one of my people, then I kill one of your people, and so forth and so on. Historically, that doesn't seem to be the usual pattern. As far as I can tell, the typical Icelandic feud ended after either 1 or 2 rounds. There is a famous feud in American history involving the Hatfields and the McCoys. And it's an elaborate story, but most of it is fictional. And it turns out, if you actually look at the history of it, that 4 people are killed. What happens is there's a fight in which 3 people badly injure one. The relatives of the injured person take the 3 captive, wait till they see if their friend dies, and after he dies, execute the 3 who have killed him. It is then over for something like 5 or 6 years until the governor of one state sends a posse into the adjacent state without permission of that state's governor in order to arrest the people who were involved in the second set of killings. That sets off several more killings, after which it's over. So that's the famous Hatfield and McCoy feud, but most of it didn't actually happen. And what continued it was the intervention of the government, not of the people involved. But you could imagine a situation where each side thinks he's in the right, therefore each side is unwilling to compensate the other, and it could go on. So you need some way of preventing that. Oops, I'm going backwards. That's not a good idea. All right. How do we arrange that might makes right? Let me start with the most elaborate feud system I'm familiar with, and that's the legal system of saga period Iceland. The settlement of Iceland starts about 870 AD. In 930 AD, they work out a legal system. And in 1263 to 1264, the country is turned over to the King of Norway. So this is a legal system that lasted for about a third of a millennium. Some problems in the last 50 or 60 years, which I'm not going to discuss here. But in saga period Iceland, there was a legislature, there were laws, there were courts, but there was no executive arm of government, which meant that once you got your verdict, it was up to you to enforce it. And how did that work? The court says that you killed my son or my brother, and you owe me 300 ounces of silver as compensation. And you pay or you don't pay. And if you don't pay, the court outlaws you. It is legal to kill an outlaw. It is tortious to defend an outlaw. So in that system, once I've won the case and you haven't gone along with it, now if I and my friends come to kill you, everybody else will know that we're the good guys and you're the bad guys. And your friends will be reluctant to defend you because if they do, they will get in legal trouble and anybody who they hurt will sue them. The Romanchal Romani are the largest Romani group in present-day England. And there is an interesting chapter of a book on gypsy law which discusses how their system works. And basically the system of the Romanchal today is a primitive version of the Icelandic system of 1,000 years earlier. That it does not have an explicit set of courts or laws, but there are norms, there are social rules of behavior. It's a fairly small community and people know them. So if you wrong me, I threaten to beat you up unless you compensate me. If you really did wrong me, our friends probably know it. So if you really wronged me, my friends will back me and your friends won't back you. If you didn't, it'll go the other way around. So if you really wronged me, you either compensate me or leave town. So that's the equivalent of the Icelandic system without a lot of the intermediate institutions. Somalia, northern Somalia, Somaliland, you had traditional law, which was partly Islamic law and partly local traditional law, and mechanisms so that when a dispute happened, you could set up an ad hoc court of basically elders of the sides involved and get a verdict from there. All of these are solving two different problems. One of them is preventing the use of threats for deliberate extortion, and the other is preventing individuals from acting as biased judges in their own case. Because as Hume pointed out long ago, we are all biased judges in our own case, and you can imagine a case where I think you've wronged me when you really haven't. That could get into lots of trouble, but if there's a mechanism, as in all of these cases, by which other people end up believing or not believing my charges, and my ability to use force against you depends on the other people believing the charges, then my own bias is not going to do very much damage. Commitment mechanisms. How do we make sure that having made the threat, I actually go through it? This is an issue which predates our species. A good many species, mostly birds or fishes, engage in what is called territorial behavior. This is the primitive version of property rights. The way territorial behavior works is that one individual of the species somehow marks the territory he is claiming, and then, as it were, turns a switch in his brain, committing himself to defend that territory. So that once he has claimed the territory, if another member of the same species trespasses, the defender will fight more and more desperately the farther into the territory the trespasser comes. The critical factor here, let me go back, if it will go back, yes. I wasn't sure if I had any other notes there. The critical factor here is that unless the invader is much stronger than the defender, a fight to the death is a loss for both. So once the trespasser knows the defender is committed to defend, it is in his interest to back down, and trespassers usually back down. All right? Humans have that same switch in the brain, though it's probably not as powerful. It's the emotion we call vengefulness, that at the point when you know somebody has wronged you, you really want to get back at him. It's sufficiently hardwired so that when I bump my head on something, my initial reaction is anger, even though the only one who's responsible is me. But it's a built-in reaction. And it's not, people think of vengefulness as irrational, but in fact, it is a rational, hardwired strategy, because the knowledge that if you wrong me, bad things will happen to you is a reason not to wrong me. All right? So that's one way humans do it. But we are somewhat fancier than birds and fishes, and we've got other and more elaborate mechanisms. We have mechanisms for external commitment. One of them is to maintain reputation, that if you wrong me and I threaten to harm you and you say, tough luck, I won't let you do that, and I back down, other people will know I'm a safe target. And so they will cut wood in my forest or seduce my daughter or do whatever, or write a poem giving me a nasty nickname. That was a tortious action in Saga period Iceland or whatever. Furthermore, people care about status. Being a wimp is shameful. It loses you status. Success gains status. And there are, in fact, in both the Comanche Indians, who were a feud system of a sort, and in one of the Icelandic sagas, the case of a volunteer enforcer. You have somebody who doesn't have enough power on his side to get the vengeance he should be able to get. Some big, strong guy comes forward and says, I'll take it over. And his incentive is not to collect any money in that case. It's to get the reputation of having successfully faced down whoever it is who was your opponent. How do we enforce your rights after you're dead? All right. The answer in a number of these cases, including the Icelandic, is that your kin inherit your claim. And your kin then have two reasons to inherit your claim. One of them is to collect the damage payment. You know, I'd like 300 ounces of silver, thank you. The other, the one reason is to get the damage payment. And one reason is that you want other people to know that if they kill one of your relatives, bad things will happen to them in order that you and your relatives won't get killed. So we have incentives, even after you're dead, for somebody else to carry through the threat. If you don't compensate, will harm you. In the Somali system, which is quite an intriguing and rather weird system, you have a nested set of coalitions. These are coalitions based in part on kinship and in part on explicit contract. Nested in the sense you have a coalition of, say, 30 people, which itself, along with some others, is a part of a coalition of 200 people, which itself, and so forth. And it's referred to by the British anthropologists as the Dia paying group. Dia is, I believe, the Arabic term for weregeld, which is the Icelandic term for the payment for killing somebody. And I think the reason they're using the Arabic term instead of the Somali term is that the anthropologists who studied the Somali had studied the Bedouin first. I'm not positive, but I think that's what's going on. But anyway, they call it the Dia paying group. And the Dia paying group has agreed to several different things. One of them is that if somebody has wronged you, they will help you harm him if he doesn't compensate. One of them is that if he does compensate, they will take a share of the compensation. You won't get all of it. One of them is that if you have wronged somebody and agree to compensation, they will pay part of the compensation. So they're providing a sort of insurance. So this means that you have a group of people who, even if you are dead, have an incentive, just as in the kin case. Now, many of them are your kin, but they don't have to be. The Somali term for a dia-paying group, formed entirely by contract rather than by kinship, is a pile of shields. It's enough fighters to be able to enforce your rights. And that was the term they used for the U.S. coalition against the Soviets, that NATO, essentially, was a pile of shields. I think it's sort of neat when you observe other cultures interpreting us in their terms, and they were right, of course, from their standpoint.
Prior to the Civil War, the Tug River Valley nestled between West Virginia and Kentucky and was the home of two families, the Hatfields and the McCoys. Once the Civil War erupted, families who had worked together harmoniously soon found themselves in the middle of this conflict. Thus enters two families, the Hatfields and the McCoys. The Hatfield family was led by William Anderson Hatfield, referred to by the regulars as Devil Aints, and his wife, Lavisa Hatfield. The Hatfield family was large, having 13 children and a strong presence on both sides of the Tug Fork. in the West Virginia, Kentucky area. It was noted by 1880 over 300 relatives with the name of Hatfield would live in that region. The other side of the patriarch of this saga was Randolph McCoy, who married his first cousin, Sally McCoy, and their family was just as large, boasting 17 children. In the region, most families were involved with farming, hunting, and logging. One notable challenge in this Appalachian region was the high rate of illiteracy. Only 44% of school-aged children were enrolled in school, with an abysmal 24% actually attending. This is the reason that many of the legal documents during this time period had marks on them instead of signatures. There are many legends about the infamous feud between the Hatfield and McCoy families. While there were certainly many similarities between the families in terms of having intense family loyalty, there were also polarizing differences. William, who were referred to as Devil Aints Hatfield, was once quoted as saying that he belonged to no church, but instead belonged to the devil's church. Conversely, Randolph McCoy was noted to have said that he believed in God and knew for certain there was a devil if you ever lived near the Hatfields. At one time, there was peace between the Hatfields and the McCoys. In fact, they had even intermarried, and while there were some stories that they were torn apart because of their split loyalties between the Confederate and Union armies, it was well established that both families favored the Confederacy. In 1863, when West Virginia joined the Union, many Confederate sympathizers panicked that their lands would be confiscated, and so survival became a priority, causing many Confederate sympathizers to abandon the Confederacy. The first altercation between these two families started in 1863 with hogs. Yes, that's right, hogs. Randall McCoy accused Ellison Hatfield of stealing 4 of his Razorback hogs. The families tried to settle the dispute in court with no resolution. Then, in 1878, Floyd Hatfield, who was the cousin of Devil Aints, was in a common area rounding up the family hogs. Randolph McCoy said that one of those hogs bore the McCoy markings, but of course the Hatfields did not agree. So Randolph McCoy filed a lawsuit against the Hatfields alleging theft, and there was this huge trial and everybody in the town attended. Now what's interesting is that there were 12 jurors. Guess who? 6 Hatfields and 6 McCoys. Bill Staton, who was a relative of both families, testified at the trial, and his testimony was determined to result in a hung jury that basically the verdict ended up clearing Floyd Hatfield. The McCoys were incensed and did not accept the verdict. In June of 1880, then, Bill Staton was killed by 2 McCoy brothers, Sam and Paris, who were later acquitted on the grounds of self-defense. In 1881, Roseanne McCoy and John Z. Hatfield meet, and then Roseanne leaves her family and lives with the Hatfields. And after a breakup, Roseanne returns home to her family. And when John Z. tries to get her back, the McCoys have him arrested. So eventually, Rosemary McCoy, who's now pregnant with John Z. Hatfield's baby, catches the measles and miscarries. John Z. Hatfield basically leaves her high and dry and marries another McCoy. By 1882, Ellison Hatfield was shot by 3 McCoy men. When Ellison Hatfield dies from his wounds, the 3 McCoy men are tied to bushes and executed. And that same year, Jeff McCoy is killed while walking on the banks of the Tug River. It would take 5 years for the Kentucky governor to appoint a bounty hunter to find Jeff McCoy's murderer. But the McCoys didn't wait for justice. On January 1st, 1888, the Hatfield patriarch Devil Aints planned an attack of the McCoy cabin led by his uncle Jim Vance. Surprisingly, Devil Aints decided not to attend this ambush, but they went to the McCoy cabin and set it on fire. And while Randolph, the patriarch of the McCoy family, escaped, 2 of the McCoy adult children were killed, and the Hatfields brutally bludgeoned matriarch Coy, almost killing her. The Hatfields in turn formed a posse and hunted down Jim Vance, killing him. The McCoy nephew was also hanged for his involvement, and that would be the only legal execution that occurred over the course of this 30-year feud. It would take until 1891 for this feud to finally end.